This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. It's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And we're broadcasting from beautiful downtown, Old Town, Scottsdale, Arizona, where it's either heaven or hell. And right now it's transitioned from hell to heaven. So it's nice to be here. Today, we have one of my favorite persons in the whole wide world. And in my opinion, he is the rock star amongst the investing world. And he's going to be talking today about the next big thing. You know, as we know, the stock market is all-time highs. Real estate market is crazy. I mean, I don't know what people are doing these days. But this next guest is going to be talking to you about the next best thing, big thing, which I agree with. And I'm very happy to welcome to the program the legendary Jim Rogers. Welcome to the program, Jim.
Oh, Robert, I'm delighted to be here. I should hang up after all of that.
And, just let the audience know is that, and just to refresh Jim's memory, back in the early 90s, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet you and also James Dale Davidson and Lord Rees-Mogg on The Sovereign Individual when they released that book. And those are like life-changing events in my life because I was just a new guy coming up. So I want to thank you for your contribution, not only to myself, but to the world. Anyway, welcome to the program.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I remember the 90s. I remember you in the 90s well, and I've watched your astonishing success ever since. So terrific. I wish I could take credit for it.
Well,
I have to give you.
You inspire people. You inspire people. That's the most powerful thing.
Well, let's move ahead. You're embarrassing me now.
Yeah. Hey, one of the best books I ever read was your book, besides Hot Commodities and all this, was Investment Biker. And when I read that book, I said, my God, what a grand adventure you went on. So would you mind taking a few minutes to explain Investment Biker and why it was such an adventure that very few people will ever go on? So would you mind telling us about it?
Well, Robert, I have been riding motor scooters and motorcycles most of my life, and I found it exhilarating to ride a motorcycle. But also I grew up in the backwoods of Alabama in a very small village, and I was burning up inside to see the world and to have adventure. I retired early from investing mainly so that I could see the world and so that I could have adventure. It took me I wanted to ride around the world on a motorcycle. People thought I was nuts, and I probably was. But I also, Robert, wanted to make sure I did it right. I had to go across the Soviet Union. I had to go across China. Because otherwise, to me, it wouldn't be really going around the world. So it took me 10 years to get full permission from Russia and China, but eventually I did. And so I and my then girlfriend set out on 2 BMWs, and we spent 2 years on the road. And my gosh, what a glorious, glorious time. I mean, I shouldn't be alive, probably. We were held hostage. We were held prisoner for 9 days once in Africa. We had all sorts of adventures, but boy, was it glorious. I'm glad I survived.
Yeah, and you went all the way through Africa, South America, across Asia. I mean, my God.
No, we did it right. As I said, I didn't want some guy to say to me one day, oh, you didn't really go around the world. You just acted like you went around. No. We crossed Europe and Asia twice. We went from Ireland to Japan and then through China and then back from Japan to Ireland through the Soviet Union, was the Soviet Union in those days, then right down through all of Africa. The whole works. No, South America, from the bottom of South America to Alaska. You should do it, Robert.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you've really ruined my life because I said, God, I'd like to have done that one. But anyway, for those who haven't read the book, please read it because it's more than just a motorcycle adventure. It's really how Jim looks at the world economy. And I still remember the one things you talk about, you check in at the bank for the exchange rate, and then you go into the black market, and you would find the real rate. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the most important lessons one needs to learn. You go to the bank first to make sure you get money so you can tell if the black market's got counterfeit, because sometimes they deal in counterfeit currency on the black market. So you get something so you know it's real. Then you go and you find the black market. And I will tell you, Robert, You don't have to find the black market. It will nearly always find you. They will say, oh, Americans are in town. Find them, find them, find them. Let's change some money.
Well, thank you. Anyway, for everybody, please read that book. It's an adventure book, but it's also an insight into the world of investment, but also seen through the world of, Jim Rogers. Like, he is legendary. The thing I say to many of my listeners is that you need to listen to rich people, not salespeople. And the reason I say that is many people take their investment advice from their financial planner or their stockbroker, their real estate agent, or their insurance agent. And very few people get the view of the world from a rich person like, Jim Rogers. We've been talking about, what's the next big thing? So what is the next big thing as far as you're concerned?
So I'll give you two or three. One is Asia. Asia is already, it's now becoming well known that Asia is the future. China is already the second richest country in the world and will be the richest eventually, not per capita yet, but it is booming, which means in many other places, Korea, Vietnam, many other places in Asia are booming. Another is agriculture now has a great, great, great future after 30 years of decline. And I guess the other big thing that's coming up is sometime in the next couple of years, we're going to have the worst financial markets in our lifetime. And I say that because, in 2008, we had a big problem, Robert, as you know,
right,
because of too much debt. Well, now the debt is much, much, much higher. So when we have the next one, and by the way, I should quickly say that the head of the Federal Reserve in America, Janet Yellen, says we will not going to have any more financial crisis, that the central bank has the world under control and we'll never have a financial problem again. I don't agree with Mrs. Yellen, so I'm telling you that we will have another financial crisis. We've had them since the beginning of time. We will always have them. And the next one's going to be very bad because of all the debt that's built up.
Any other comments on the debt and why it's going to lead to the? I agree with you, but I'd rather hear it from your words. What you see that people may not see.
I can give you many examples. The Federal Reserve, the central bank in America, in 2008, had a balance sheet with $800 billion, mainly government bonds. Now it's nearly $5 trillion. So the Federal Reserve's balance sheet alone has expanded by, nearly 600% in just 9 years. That's unheard of. That's staggering. And a lot of that is garbage. They alone have bought up a lot of junk bonds, a lot of bonds, and somebody's going to have to deal with that someday. And Robert, who the somebody is? It's you and me and the listeners to this program, I'm afraid.
And the
Federal Reserve, they're not going to take the blame, but that's the American government's debt has gone up many times under Obama and now under Trump. The debt is going up hundreds of billions of dollars every year. That's billions with a B. It's staggering what's going on. That's just America. Japan is going as fast as they can, running up their debt. You look at places like England, France. It's staggering what's happening out there in the world. Even China. I'm bullish on China, but China now has debt. 15 years ago, there was very little debt in China, but now even China has a lot of debt. So you're going to see bankruptcies in China too. It's going to shock a lot of people, including me, and I know they're coming.
That to the layperson, they hear you talk about debt and all that stuff. But with your background, what can you take it one level deeper? What does that mean to you? All this debt.
To me personally, I mean, when the next crisis comes, I know it's going to be bad, and I hope I survive it because it's going to be a mess. But I know that there are lots of junk bonds now in the world. I would urge people not to invest in junk bonds unless they know a lot about them. I also would urge people to be careful of investing in any bonds because, when interest rates start going higher, and Robert, as you know, interest rates have never been this low in the history of the world. In some places, interest rates are even negative. That has never, ever happened in the history of the world. It's an experiment by the central banks, led by ours, unfortunately, by Washington, D.C. And so when the interest rates start going higher, it's going to destroy a lot of people. A lot of people have a lot of debt based on zero interest rate. The state of Illinois pension fund, I don't know what's going to happen. They don't have any money to pay the pensions. Many states don't. So you're going to see some dramatic problems for lots of us. Anybody relying on a pension not just in the U.S., in many countries, must be concerned because many of the pension funds will not be able to meet their obligations. Be sure that you're not too in debt yourself. I would urge your listeners, unless they really know what they're doing, not to have a lot of debt, because a lot of people around them are going to be suffering and going bankrupt.
So once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is the infamous. I mean, this guy is, in my world, a rock star of investors. And the best thing about the Rich Dad program is I get to talk to people like Jim Rogers, part of the Quantum Fund at the start with George Soros and all that. And I also think it's interesting that he lives in Singapore, not the U.S. I believe you're teaching your daughter to speak Chinese, not Hawaiian.
Well, Robert, yes. I said before that China is going to be the most important country in the 21st century, or certainly one of the most important countries in the 21st century. So I wanted my children to grow up speaking perfect Mandarin and knowing Asia. I mean, I'm trying to prepare them for the 21st century. I don't speak Mandarin. I'm hopeless. I can barely speak English, much less Mandarin. But I'm preparing these girls, so we moved here. Fortunately, we're Americans, and we can live anywhere we want.
Right.
We're not North Koreans or Cubans or something.
So once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. When we come back, we'll be speaking again to Jim Rogers. The question today is, with the stock market at an all-time high, the real estate market in a bubble, all of it's caused by excessively low interest rates, it's now about to burst. And that's what Jim and myself and many people all around the world are worried about. I'm glad he mentioned pension funds because, CalPERS, which is the largest public service pension plan in the U.S., they were sued, and it just revealed they're $1 trillion underwater. They cannot meet their liabilities. And so all of these people who had job security with the government and all that, they might be in serious trouble. So that's why I think I'm glad you're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. And as I said, you're listening to a rich man, not a salesman. More than a rich man, a very smart rich man. So when we come back, we'll be talking again to Jim Rogers and what he sees to be the big investments of the future. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Advisors have a great gift for you. Visit RichDadAdvisors.com and receive 5 free reports on business and investing success. 5 free reports that can help you right now. And while there, check out the Author's Choice audio series. Audio is a great way to learn. And for as little as 99 cents, you can download key chapters from all the Rich Dad Advisor books. You can listen to The Myths and Magic of Real Estate Investing, 7 Steps to Limited Liability, The 4 Pillars of Investing, Team Code of Honor, or The Psychology of Debt, among other great audios. For pennies, you can power up your skills for getting out of the rat race. So please visit RichDadAdvisors.com for your 5 free reports and your powerful and affordable audio chapters. That's RichDadAdvisors.com for great information that can help you right now.
Your financial education continues. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today we're talking to a really, really rich man versus a salesman. And I love Jim Rogers simply because he's got nothing really to sell you. So he's not afraid of losing his job. And every time I see him on either CNBC or wherever he's speaking, he just says what he really thinks about. He doesn't have to be politically correct, and he's not afraid of losing his job or insulting anybody. So he's a perfect gentleman that way. But today, honored to have him on the show because we're taking financial advice from a rich man. Once again, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio Show anytime, anywhere on your schedule through iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them because repetition is how we learn best. If you listen to this program one more time, you'll pick up even more. You'll be smarter. But more importantly, you can share this program with friends, family members, and business associates, and even your children, because as Jim said, being a rich man, he can move his family to Singapore, a great island nation, so his daughter will speak perfect Mandarin to prepare her for the future. So that's why one of the things about being a rich man, you can choose to live anywhere in the world because you can afford to live anywhere in the world. So, Jim, when we're on the break, I asked you about Brexit, and I understand that you did a lot of business with the pound sterling. So, what do you know about Brexit? The English leaving the common European Union.
Yeah, I went to university. My second degree was in the UK, so I have a bit of knowledge about all of this. The Brits are going to leave. Whether it's right or wrong, who cares? They're going to do it. It's a fact. We have to deal with facts, not with anything else. And when they leave, they're going to have trading problems with many of the people in Europe. The main thing that the British have to sell to the world is oil, the North Sea oil, which they have a lot of. But unfortunately for them, it's owned by Scotland. And now Scotland may leave the UK. And if they do, they're going to take the oil with them. And the other thing that the Brits have is, other than education and the English language, is the city of London, the English Wall Street, which essentially is the financial center of much of the world, certainly in Europe. And when that leaves Europe, the Europeans have already made it very, very clear that they don't want London to be the financial center of Europe because they've left. And so new financial centers, whether it's Paris or Amsterdam or Berlin or Frankfurt or who knows what, are going to develop. And that's going to mean less and less income for the Brits. And so I'm very, very pessimistic about the future of the UK, which I love. I went to university. I actually got married there, all kinds of things there, because they've got huge debts. We don't have much to sell to the world other than the things I mentioned. But if the Scots take the oil, they're going to leave the debt, and the city of London is going to move to the mainland, to Europe. So I'm worried about the UK. I don't like saying it because I have many fond memories.
I am too. Another thing I'm concerned about, here you have the U.S., and you have these two island nations. You have England, or the UK, and the other side is Japan. And, when I was a kid, the Japanese, I'm fourth generation Japanese American, Japanese had the highest savings rate per capita in the world, and now they're printing money and they're operating on a negative interest rate. What is your view on Japan from sitting in Singapore?
Well, I'm glad you asked. One thing I should quickly tell you, I own Japanese shares, and I'm buying Japanese shares. The market's going to open in a few minutes, and I'm going to buy some more. But I am terribly pessimistic about the future of Japan. Japan has a declining population, not just a low birth rate. The population is actually in decline now, and they have staggering internal debts. They refuse to have immigration, and they refuse to cut their spending. So if I were a 10-year-old Japanese, I would do what your forebears did, leave, because it's going to be a mess in 30 or 40 years. The debt goes higher and higher, the population goes down, and they don't let in foreigners. I mean, that's their business. If that's what they want, that's fine. It's none of my business how they run their country. But that doesn't mean I want to be there in 10 years. But having said that, Robert, I own the shares. I'm buying more shares today. The Japanese stock market today is down 50% from its all-time high in 1990. You were still a little boy in 1990. But in 1990, the Japanese stock market was 40,000. Today it's about 20,000. It's been doing nothing for 27 years, and that's in the process of changing, if you ask me. So I'm buying more.
But
don't worry.
Why would you buy Japanese shares if you're pessimistic on the future?
Well, the future's, in the long run, we're all dead, but there's a long I hope there's a long time between now and the long run. The Japanese central bank is even looser and printing more money than we are. The Japanese government is spending even more money than Mr. Trump says he's going to spend. No, I mean, everything. This is not good for the future of Japan, Robert, but it's certainly good for investors, for people who buy and sell stocks and things like that in Japan, because there's all this money sloshing around. The government has vowed to get stocks up. They're giving incentives for people to invest in the stock market. I mean, all of these things are wonderful for people like me. Are they good for Japan? No. As I said, if I were 10 years old in Japan, I would move.
So that brings us to the U.S. The U.S., the Dow has hit all-time highs. What's your view on that?
Well, I own U.S. dollars. I own a lot of U.S. dollars, not because the reason I own it, Robert, is because many people in times of turmoil look for a safe haven. They think the U.S. dollar is a safe haven, and it has been historically. It's not a safe haven, Robert. America is the largest debtor nation in the world, and the debts are skyrocketing every month, no matter what they say in Washington. So eventually, that's all going to come apart. But in the meantime, I own the dollar because it's going to go higher and higher as people look for safety. Eventually, U.S. dollar will get overpriced. Eventually, it might even turn into a bubble, depending on how bad the rest of the world gets. I hope at that point I'm smart enough to listen to your program and sell my dollars and buy something else.
Well, my question is not so much the dollar, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's 23,000 or something.
That's making all-time highs, and we may be sitting here. It's been a long time since we had a big bubble in the stock market in America. We may be sitting here watching it, Robert. One reason I'm investing in other places is because if the U.S. really does continue to turn into a bubble, it's at all-time highs. Japan, which is the third largest economy in the world, is 50% below its all-time high. My view is you're going to see catch-up in other markets as they catch up to what's going on in the U.S. China's 40% below its all-time high. So I'm trying to find the places that are somewhat sound, where there's a lot of things going on in the markets, and on the theory that they will catch up with what's happening in the U.S.
And you've also said several times that you expect the biggest crash ever coming, possibly collapse and all this. But you said something else very interesting. You talked about millennials and why, they're good in a bull market, but you don't want to stand too close to millennial in a bear market. What do you mean by that?
Well, I was 26 once, believe it or not, and you were 26
right.
once. And many of the 26-year-olds that I knew then and know now know no fear. And they get wrapped up in the excitement of a rising market, and they're making a lot of money, and they think they're smart because they're making money. Sometimes people confuse a bull market with brains. They think because they're making money, they're smart. But it's really just a bull market. And the young people, for better or for worse, in a bull market, that's who you want investing with you because they just say buy, buy, buy. And the more absurd the story sounds, the more they buy and the more money they make. But unfortunately, Robert, since they don't know why they're making money, they lose a lot of money when things turn the other way. So you want a millennial, you want a 26-year-old when things are going up, and it's a bull market, especially a bubble. But when that bubble bursts, you want somebody with gray hair who's seen it all. Even some of the guys with the gray hair lose it all.
Right.
So,
one of my teachers says that there's nothing worse than a bear market because it seems to go on forever and ever and ever. So
every day you wake up and it just gets worse.
So when you come back, we're going to be talking about what you see the big thing. One is agriculture. One is fintech. And I want you to read on gold, since a lot of my people, a lot of my listeners are like me. I've been a gold bug since '72, and I just buy and hold. I don't even care the price. I'm going by ounces. So anyway, our guest today is infamous Jim Rogers. He's one of the most respected people I know of. Every time I talk to him, I learn more. Like I said, I went to see him with my wife Kim in Washington, D.C. We were there to meet Jim Dale Davidson and Lord Rees-Mogg. They wrote the book Sovereign Individual, another great book from a historical standpoint. And I love Jim's book, Investment Biker, simply because he has lived a life that only a rich man could have lived. So before we go to break, any comments for young people or for listeners right now as how you see things going?
Well, first I want to say hello to Kim. I'm sorry she's not here today.
Yeah, she misses you terribly. So.
Well, one thing that I've learned is if you can find a good partner, it's going to help you because there's nothing worse than a divorce or two or three. So if you can find a good partner
yep.
that's going to be supportive, it's going to help you in your life.
Yeah, Kim's I don't know why she put up with me, but it's 31 years next month, so I'm very lucky.
Poor woman.
I know, that's what I say. So when we come back, Jim's going to be talking about fintech, whatever that is. Also, comment on Bitcoin and gold and whatever else he feels like talking about. But one of my favorite new subjects is agriculture. And I've just started investing in avocados because I kind of like avocados and they're getting more expensive every day. So when we come back, we'll be talking to Jim about the next big things that you can watch and that will do well in the future. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki. This is The Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, The Rich Dad Radio Show. And one of the problems I see with people is they take financial advice from poor people or from salespeople. Not that they're bad people, but they're not rich people. So anyway, if you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes and Android. You can listen to this program anytime on Rich Dad Radio. We archive all of our programs so you can listen to it again because repetition is how we learn. If you listen to this program a second time, you'll be twice as smart. And most importantly, share it with your friends, family, and business associate and discuss it. Because what we're talking about is the bubble the world is in right now. Jim and many other people like myself are predicting a big crash coming. And the question is, where do you go next before it crashes? So in the last segment we have with Jim Rogers, we're going to be into what he's looking at. But let's start with the question I'm always asked, Jim, what about Bitcoin? And my response to them is, if you're going to invest in Bitcoin, study it. But don't listen to me because I'm not an investor in it. So what are your comments on Bitcoin?
Well, I'll say the same thing. Robert, I've never bought nor sold any cryptocurrency. I wish I had, obviously. I'd be the richest man you know if I was that smart. Unfortunately, I wasn't that smart. I don't know how it's going to work out. I do know that the Internet is changing everything we know, including money and health and post offices and banking. So, yes, it's going to have an effect. Whether Bitcoin is it or not, I don't know. You've heard of IBM, but IBM did not invent the computer. So whether Bitcoin's going to survive, I haven't a clue. There were 200 or 300 car companies 100 years ago. Now there are only 25 car companies. Some survive, but many disappear. And if you can explain it to me what I should do, I'll listen. That doesn't mean I'll do it, but I certainly do not know enough about it to buy or sell myself. Not right now.
And I was just in China last week, and I don't know your opinion about it, but I think they're in the passing lane on us right now. Would you agree with that?
Well, they certainly are in many things. If you go to China, people don't have money anymore. They pay for a cup of coffee with their telephone. It's astonishing how rapidly the Chinese have developed, Internet-wise, electronic-wise, computer-wise, call it what you will. Every time I go there, I'm just amazed. There's some really amazing companies there.
Yeah, I was out there, and they said they don't want cash. They want to use their cell phones. They have some form of Bitcoin or something like that, but they're already down the road, and we're just kind of finding out about it. Would you agree with that?
Agree with it. It's a fact. There's nothing to agree with. It's an absolute certifiable fact. The Chinese are far ahead of us in many things on the Internet and electronic technology. I don't like saying it, but I have to deal with the facts. Robert, they produce 10 times as many engineers every year as we do. Maybe they're bad engineers, but out of that many, some of them are really smart and really good, and we're already starting to see the effects.
Right. So this leads to the next question. You're very bullish on fintech. Now, is fintech is that Bitcoin, or how would you define fintech and the bank in Hong Kong?
It's my children will never go to a post office or a bank in their lifetimes, and they rarely go to a doctor because everything is now the computer. Fintech, whatever it is, and you could define it 17 different ways because it's a new and evolving thing. It's all going to be on the computer. Already people who are managing money with robots, with computers. I'm not smart enough, but it is changing. It will continue to change everything we know. So whatever you want to define fintech, whether that's a bank on the computer, a money manager on the computer, a stockbroker on the computer, it's all going to be on the computer, whatever that means. All those banks you see on the corner, they're not going to be around in 20 years.
Right. And I was just in London a month ago, and my friends are Indian, from India. And they're very bright, and they're bankers, English bankers. They say it's not Bitcoin, but blockchain that's going to change banking. Do you know anything about that?
Well, yes, it's part of what I was just saying, that everything is going to be on the computer, on the internet, and Bitcoin may disappear. But the fact that we are going to settle and pay on the computer with blockchain or whatever the word is going to be that's going to evolve, that is absolutely correct. I don't know which one or how it's going to evolve, just like I did not know that IBM would wind up being the dominant computer company. I mean, most people never heard of the company which invented computers. It doesn't matter. Somebody evolves, and that's what's going to happen with blockchain and all of our financial dealings on the computer in the future.
Okay. And what is this ITF Bank, Into the Future Bank Corporation in Hong Kong and Singapore? You're now investing in that. Why?
I have a very small investment. It is a fintech company. They're smart guys. You can ask me in 30 years if I did the right thing. It's a startup with smart boys, young men, I should say, because they are young men. They got good ideas, good brains, good capabilities. Who knows? I don't. I invested a small amount. As I say, maybe my children are going to be rich, or maybe my children will say, how could you have been so foolish?
You're not a buyer or seller of gold, but for people like myself who are not fintech people or Bitcoin people, to me, gold has been money for at least 4,000 years. The Chinese invented it, or paper money, I mean. And I just buy gold because I don't trust paper. So what are your views on gold? And I know you think it has to go down more, but what are your views on gold?
Well, I own gold. I own silver. Never sold any. Been buying it since, I think, 1971. I bought my first gold. You said 72.
Yeah.
I've never sold any. And if it goes down, which I expect, I hope I'm smart enough to buy a lot more. Because before this is over, Robert, gold is going to turn into a huge frenzy of its own, because we're going to have turmoil. And when people lose confidence in governments and lose confidence in paper money, they've always gone to gold and silver. Whether they should or not is a different question. That's what they've always done, and they will do that again.
So how do you see gold positioned to Bitcoin or cyber money? Is it any comparison?
Well, there could be. The advocates tell you there is, and that Bitcoin will replace gold because people can use it anonymously. You can use gold anonymously, but not quite as anonymously. And they say that Bitcoin, you can transfer thousands of miles away over the computer, which you cannot do with gold, etc. So they say that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will eventually replace gold and silver. Maybe, Robert, but not in your lifetime and not in my lifetime.
That's what I would think. Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're very fortunate today to have the infamous Jim Rogers, probably the person I look forward to speaking with the most, just because of his unorthodox view of the world. And as I said, he sits in Singapore, it's an amazing, and for those that haven't been to Singapore, go see it, because you're looking at the future. Jim's also investing in a company called ITF, which is into the future, the world's first fintech bank. So he's looking into the future. And also he's very close to China. He's even training or teaching his daughter to speak perfect Mandarin, preparing for the future. And I think that's how I suggest all of our listeners prepare for the future, because yesterday's gone. It really is gone. The hegemony of the U.S. dollar is an obsolete idea. And with gold, I think the Chinese and the Russians are cutting a deal with the yuan is going to be backed by, they're going to buy Russian oil in yuan, but the yuan will be backed by gold. Now, if that happens, the dollars be suspicious. Have you heard anything about that? The yuan being backed by gold and all that stuff?
No. Of course I have. Yeah, the Chinese, and not just the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, lots of people are trying to move away from the U.S. dollar for many reasons, many legitimate reasons. And so, yes, the Chinese are doing their best to open many markets in gold and in their own currency, backed by gold. Now, right now, a lot of people say, I don't want to buy oil and cotton in renminbi, which is the Chinese currency. But then the Chinese say, okay, we're backing by gold. So if you use our currency to trade oil, you're really backed by gold. So that makes it a lot safer for a lot of people. No, it's going to happen. The U.S. dollar, as I said before, we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And it's getting worse every day, Robert. I don't like saying this. I'm an American like you.
Right.
But it's a fact, and we have to deal with that.
Right. So going into the next big thing, like I said, I was just at the New Orleans conference. For all of you who are interested in alternative investing, the New Orleans Investment Conference is reportedly the oldest investment conference in America. It was started by this radical guy named Jim Blanchard, who made it legal for Americans to own gold. I mean, when I bought my first piece of gold in Hong Kong, I believe I paid $50 for it, but then I was a criminal because I was an American and I bought gold. And it took this guy Blanchard, Jim Blanchard, who started the New Orleans Investment Conference, to make it legal for Americans to own gold. And as I was saying to Jim during the break, is that wherever I went, I see Jim's smiling face, by quoting you, that you're not endorsing anybody, but your smiling face is talking about, you're saying agriculture is going to be the big thing. Would you mind telling us about that?
Agriculture has been a disaster for 30 years. The highest rate of suicide in the UK is in agriculture. Average age of farmers in America is 58. In Japan, it's 66. Australia, the average age of farmers is the highest in recorded history. Robert, more people in America study public relations than study agriculture. I mean, they're all dying out because it's been so terrible. Millions of Indian farmers commit suicide every year. So we're going to have a change after a 30-year decline. And so I would urge people, well, first of all, if you don't like living in the city and you like the outdoors, become a farmer. There's no competition. Everybody's dying. And the kids are all becoming stockbrokers or fintech. So it's time to go into agriculture. That's where the opportunities are. And if we have the horrendous financial system that I think is coming up sometime in the next couple of years, agriculture is going to do extremely well because at least you'll be able to eat if nothing else.
Because the population is still growing, right?
Oh, yeah. Population is growing everywhere. Number of farmers is decreasing. I mean, and there's not much competition. I'm not very smart. I like to go into something where there's not much competition.
So what kind of agriculture are you investing in, or what are you looking at, or what are your criteria?
Well, in many ways. You can buy tractor companies, seed companies. You can buy land and become a farmer or lease it to a farmer. I prefer agriculture products, cotton, wheat, oil, gold, etc. You can buy that through futures. You can buy it through some companies. Or you can buy indexes. There are agricultural indexes. Buy an index. And
you have a fund also, don't you?
Well, I have an index fund. It's Rogers Agriculture Fund. It's on the New York Stock Exchange. The symbol's RJA, but I mean, it's an index. Nobody manages it. It's an index.
Okay, I see. What did you think about Amazon buying Whole Foods? What's the thought behind that?
Well, I know the plot, and if he can pull off what he says, there's not going to be any shops. Everything's going to be on Amazon, no matter what you buy. You want a cup of coffee? Call Amazon. They'll send it over to your house. No, I know what he's trying to do. Whether he can pull it off, I have absolutely no idea.
Okay. Well,
you should listen to your radio show to find out.
That's why I have people like you on the program. So, got any final words for our listeners? I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. So, any final words about the future and what you see coming, or anything you want to say?
Just be careful, because right now things are great. There's going to be more euphoria, but that always throughout history has ended badly. So be prepared. Be knowledgeable. Listen to this program. Be knowledgeable. When you get knowledgeable, you'll be worried. And when you're worried, you'll get prepared. Don't listen to Janet Yellen. Don't listen to Janet Yellen. Listen to Robert.
Oh, God. Well, thank you. With that, Jim, thanks very much. I'll tell Kim you gave her your regards. She's really upset she wasn't on the program. She was in Sweden teaching women about how to get rid of their husbands. But other than that, now her motto is, you don't need a man anymore. Because women are smarter than men when it comes to money. That's her whole campaign.
Well, she's right. She's right.
Anyway, thank you very much for the time, and appreciate everything, your contribution to everybody.
Thank you, Robert. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. And we come back with the next popular part of our program, which is Ask Robert.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Do you own an LLC or LP? Are you aware of the new rules? The IRS has mandated new audit rules that require every LLC operating agreement and LP limited partnership agreement be amended. This dramatic requirement has never before been experienced, and changes must be made by December 31st. Corporate Direct, owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton, can guide you through these new rules. Call 800-600-1760. That's 800-600-1760. Or visit corporatedirect.com. Contact Corporate Direct today to stay in IRS compliance.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And once again, thank you to Jim Rogers. And unfortunately, one of my big concerns is that most people get their financial advice from salespeople like real estate brokers, insurance brokers, stock brokers, mutual fund salesmen, financial planners. And they're not rich people, they're salespeople. And many of them really don't know what they're talking about. And so that's why I would rather listen to a guy like Jim Rogers or a guy like James Rickards or some of the other people we have on our program here. Because if you get bad financial advice, you're polluting your biggest asset, which is your brain. So anyway, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. You can listen to this program again at richdadradio.com. We archive all of our programs at richdadradio.com because if you listen to this program again, you'll be twice as smart. But more importantly, share it with friends, family, business associate, and discuss it. Because Jim is calling, like I'm calling, and many other guys are calling for the biggest crash in world history coming. It's the end of the hegemony of the U.S. dollar. And there's going to be ups and downs, strengths and weaknesses. But like it or not, it's going to change. And I meet so many people who say, well, America's been strong up to now. Yes, but that's ending. As Jim said, because he lives in Singapore now. He's an American, but he wants to be close to China. I was in China last week. They've already passed us. Bitcoin isn't even an issue there. They're already down the road. Technologically, why? They're gone down the road. And, they have a huge class differences. They have problems. They have huge balance. They have huge problems, but they're actually moving forward. It's a dictatorship. So they can get more done. They don't need to ask permission of the Senate and the House and all these guys. If this guy Xi just says do it, we do it. So they're going to move faster while we're still in discussion and arguing on the Senate and in the Congress and in the White House. So that's why I love having a guy like Jim Rogers here. And please get his book. One of his books is called Street Smarts, Adventures on the Road and in the Markets. Also, A Bull in China, Investing Profitably in the World's Greatest Market. And, of course, the classic Investment Biker. I love that book because that guy was crazy enough to ride a motorcycle all over the world with his girlfriend. It's the most interesting book in his view on the world economy because he's a very rich man, more than in just money, but in life experience. His website is jimrogers.com. So, Melissa, and you can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. So, Melissa, what's the first question?
Robert, our first question today comes from Ivan in Toronto. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert, I'm from Toronto, Canada, and own 5 properties. You mentioned a crash is coming probably in 2018. How do you feel about Canada? Usually we follow suit, but I don't think Canada is in any trouble. Am I wrong?
It depends on who you ask. It's a very good question. Canada is America's #1 trading partner. So if America gets in trouble, Canada gets in trouble. I was just not in Panama, but I was talking to a friend. He's a Canadian who moved to Panama. And I said, why'd you move there? He says, because he was an FX trader, foreign exchange trader. And he says, Canada is in serious trouble. So that's his point of view. And this guy's in on the markets every day. So he's another guy who's close to the markets in foreign exchange, the loonie versus the dollar, yen, and euro. But he went and bought a huge farm in Panama. he's growing avocados, and which is what I'm looking into right now, how to grow organic avocados, and which Jim Rogers is doing. But he also said, I'd rather have an avocado than a Canadian dollar or a U.S. dollar. So I'm just giving a perspective on how different people look at things. And like, I would have listened to this guy if he wasn't an FX trader, foreign exchange trader. He says, I don't trust any currency right now, including the U.S. dollar. So if you look at our three closest partners of the U.S., we have Canada, England, and Japan. All three are not in that good a shape, the same as Australia. When I look at the gold to GDP ratios of Canada, Japan, China, and Australia, even though Australia and Canada are gold-producing nations, your gold to GDP ratio is really, really low. I think Australia is like 0.08, Canada's 0.01, Japan's even lower than that. U.S. is 2.7% debt gold to GDP, and Germany is 4.6 gold to GDP. So the strongest one is Germany, but I think the strongest currency right now is the Swiss franc. So if you play the foreign exchange markets, there's better currencies than the loonie, the Canadian dollar, or the U.S. dollar, or the euro. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Avery in Bozeman, Montana. Favorite book, Rich Dad Guide to Investing. It says, in September, President Trump and Congress enacted a bill to suspend the debt limit, allowing the Treasury Department to issue more debt. How would you comment about President Trump's actions and his intention to cancel the debt ceiling personally? What do you think it will lead to?
Well, for those who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Rich Dad's number one first lesson was the rich don't work for money. And that's because, as Jim says, he bought his first piece of gold in 1971. I bought mine in 1972 when it was still illegal for Americans to own gold. And the reason we bought gold was because Nixon took us off the gold standard August 15th, 1971. That means they can print as much money as they want within limits. But by taking us off a debt ceiling, that means we can print even more, because the U.S. dollar after 1971 became debt. And that's why savers are losers. And that's why so many of these people who are saving in their pension funds, like CalPERS, or, as Jim said, if you should listen to this program again, he says that could be the canary in the mine, is all the old guys like me, baby boomers, you might not be able to retire. And if they're allowed to print as much money as they can, so they might have to bail out retirement. I don't know what's going to happen, but if they have to bail out retirement plans, you're going to find that silver will probably go to $400 an ounce and gold will go to $10,000 an ounce. So there's good news and bad news in anything I say, but the most important thing is to understand what taking the dollar, the debt ceiling off the U.S. economy means they're just going to print money to solve problems. It's like giving an alcoholic a drink, or somebody you can't stop using their credit cards, giving them more credit cards. Basically, that's what we've done. And I could be wrong, but from my point of view, that would be like giving a beggar a credit card. That's what we're doing. And for those of you not holding gold or silver or avocados, I would think differently right now. So that's my response. Look at the big picture. The economy is deflating. The Fed cannot stand deflation, so they must print money to be able to pay off this debt with cheaper dollars. That's why I'm a real estate guy. That's why I love debt, because I'm always paying off my debt with cheaper dollars. That's why when interest rates came down to I can borrow at 2%, 2.5% now. That's giving money away. And then my friend Dave Ramsey is saying, get out of debt. Well, that's for most people. The average person, they should get out of debt. But for the rich, although those with financial education, those who listen to Rich Dad Radio, I borrow money because money became debt in 1971, and I borrow money to buy assets such as real estate. I mean, investment real estate, not my house. So really, it's about financial education, and the United States and the world is collapsing, is going down. So all these governments, in response, are printing as much money. That's what Jim says. The Japanese, he feels so sorry for them. They'll probably be the first Western nation to crash and go into depression. I feel for my friends in Japan. If I was in Japan right now, I'd be buying gold as fast as I could, because gold to yen ratio, no, hands down, gold's going to be much more valuable than the yen. The dollar, as Jim says, might get very strong. That's why FX, foreign exchange, is a very important subject, and that's why I have friends in foreign exchange, FX, like my Canadian friend, but he says, I'd rather have an avocado than a Canadian dollar. That should tell you something. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Jacob in Iowa. Favorite book, Rich Dad Guide to Investing. He says, you say savers are losers, but where are individuals with little capital supposed to put our money when all of the financial asset classes seem to be overvalued?
Everybody would ask me that question. I say, what the heck have you studied? When I came back from Vietnam in 1972, the first, my poor dad asked me to go get my MBA. I lasted 6 months because my MBA instructors, especially my accounting and marketing guys, they had no idea what they're talking about. They'd never been in the real world. That's a problem. School teachers are good people, but most of them don't know what the real world is. They've always had that steady paycheck and pension. And, that's their world, not my world. So you've got to invest in your financial education. So Rich Dad Education is education. We have coaching. A lot of people have education programs. I went to the New Orleans conference, investment conference once a year. There's the Freedom Fest in July next year. There's also the real estate guys. They have their investment cruises. There's a lot of people offering what I call alternative investments. But you've got to study. If you don't study, then save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. But as Jim and I fear, the biggest crash is coming in those markets, not because stocks, bonds, and mutual funds are bad, but the bond market is about to come down. That's why you got to be careful. You've got to study. If you don't study, then cut up your credit cards, listen to Susie Orman, and get debt free, like with Dave Ramsey. Good advice for them. So anyway, I thank you all for your questions. I hope you've learned something. I want to thank Jim Rogers. Again, his website is jimrogers.com. Read his book, Investment Biker. It's a good adventure book, but that's how he sees the world of money. And remember, you want to listen to rich people, not salespeople. So once again, thank you for submitting your questions to richdadradio.com. Ask Robert, and I thank you all for listening.